actually what this is, son, is this is the original assault rifle. It is the very first one ever built on the planet. This one in particular is marked STG44, which is Sturmgewehr 44. Assault, it literally translates to assault rifle of 1944. This particular one was built in 1945. It's an original German weapon. Nothing's ever been done to it. It's legally owned under a federal firearms license. It fires single and fully automatic. It was innovative for its time because, and it originally came out in 1942, and it was the first time that an intermediate rifle cartridge, taking a regular rifle cartridge and shrinking it down so a soldier could carry more ammo, was the first time that concept was ever thought of and implemented. And the weapon was originally called the MKB-42, machine carbine of 1942. Slightly different design. And Hitler found out about it and he said, wait a minute, no, we need machine pistols and belt-fed machine guns. We don't need machine carbines. They're too complicated for an infantryman. I know, I was one. So to hide it from, to hide the production of it from him, they changed the name to the MP-43, machine pistol, so it sort of disappeared off his radar. They continued evolution of the design. The change from MP-43 to MP-44, literally the only difference is the muzzle nut.
Also, really, for like 1942, 43?
No, the 42 and the 43 are vastly different, but the 43, 44 is literally just a name change. Only way to tell them apart is the gap in the middle of the muzzle nut right here is a little wider. Okay. It's really odd. Then in 1944, they standardized the design. All the other prototypes developments were dropped, and they stuck with this one, which was originally the handle design, and it was produced up until the end of 1944 as the MP-44, which is what most people know it as. Then Hitler was renaming everything to give it big scary names, the Wunderwaffen, and he renamed this the Sturmgewehr, the assault rifle. It's a rifle just for assaulting people or assaulting positions. And it was like, ooh, what's an assault rifle? And they would have to think about what it was, even though it was the same rifle they'd already been facing in combat. And this one is actually marked STG44.
So, like during the Battle of the Bulge, they've known it as a Sturmgewehr at that point, or only after?
No, well, by the Battle of the Bulge, it still was being called the MP-44, the machine pistol 44. This one was 45 dated, and as near as we can tell by the serial number, was probably made in the last like 60 days of the war. Wow. It's the production figures and all that are sort of lost to history. But this gun was innovative for how it was built because it was the first rifle that used plain steel stampings as major components of its construction. You see the MG42 up here on the armored car. It was the first machine gun that used steel stampings as the predominant structures.
And the first propane-driven machine gun too.
That one's propane-driven, but on a real one.
Well, is this interesting to point out too? Because you know how, like on the G43, they have like the cast iron parts.
Right.
Like how many cast iron pieces are on this?
Forged.
Forged as opposed.
You have the bolt, the bolt body. You have the operating rod and gas piston, the gas block, the sight base. There's a couple small pieces inside that are investment castings, and then in the receiver, right where you see this line come up and across, there's a thing called a trunnion block that is machined out of solid steel. Other than those pieces, all the rest of this is predominantly steel stampings that require they're super easy to make, and what they would do, rather than having to build the gun in one big factory, is they could take this piece to a tinsmith and say, I need 1,000 of these. And little Hans the tinsmith would sit down and make 1,000 of these. And it doesn't have to be made, it doesn't have to or anything, it literally. So like the gas tube is a stamping, the whole receiver wrapped around that trunnion block is a stamping, and you guys who are in the U.S. Army will recognize this little dust cover door from the M16 rifle. This is where they got the idea for it. The magazines, which are a little bit more complex and have to be made to a tighter tolerance, were made by actual arms manufacturers, where some of the subcomponents of the main rifle could be made virtually by anybody. Yeah. So they would have these parts made in all these little factories all over the country. So when the Allied bombing campaign was looking for center of the arms production, most of these components could be made in little like 1,000 square foot factories rather than the big giant 100,000 square foot factories that were easier to bomb. So as production floor space was bombed out of existence during the bombing campaign, production on this actually went up. Oddly enough, in that same period, quality went up because a very simple event happened. The Albert Speer was the head of, he was Minister of Armaments, and the Ministry for Armaments was bombed out of existence.
Oh.
All of their records and all of their tracking sort of went away, and Albert Speer thought that was a great thing because
so they
just
no
let
hinder.
people make stuff. No hindrance, no more bureaucracy. You don't even have an office anymore. So that's how weapons like this were able to be developed. And then you can see the post-war evolution of this design and the AK-47, which Kalashnikov
swears he never even saw.
Never saw.
No.
But you can see the basics of the H&K stock attachment design with a simple, it's just a simple pin, you push it out.
Yeah.
Whoa, whoa.
But you were saying, yeah, the stock has to be on in order for it to work.
Yeah, but the stock has to be on for it to fire. But it disassembles very, very, very simply, easily. All the parts just lift out. There you can see the bolt body and the op rod locked together. But yeah, it's such a simple thing, and even with the drop forgings and the machining, it requires, and you can see all the fire control components are predominantly just steel stampings and very simple springs. It's a little bit overcomplicated for the job it has to do, but
typically German.
yeah, it's an incredibly robust design.
No,
I mean,
that's a stereotype.
this one was made in 1945 and is still operating in 2009 and operates almost flawlessly. But I mean, it's the father or grandfather of virtually every modern assault rifle in the world today, in one way or another, including the intermediate rifle cartridge, the steel stampings, the ease of production, simple inline design rather than having to have elaborate sight systems set up to compensate for a drop stock or whatever. But it's that simple inline design. There was a version of it, the MP43-2, had a little scope rail right here and a Vampire night sight, which was an infrared sight mounted on here. And it was one of the first weapons deployed in combat that had an infrared sight on it. And the German gas mask canister is where the batteries were, so they started finding these guns with this big weird scope on it with cables, and they didn't know what it was. They were able to figure it out because we were developing similar things. But yeah, this is truly the modern assault rifle.
Now, do you have any explanation as to why you would predominantly see this only on the Eastern Front?
Well, that you would see it only on the Eastern Front is it was written about more on the Eastern Front. How many were issued there as opposed to how many were issued on the Western Front? Similar things. But yeah, this is truly the modern assault rifle.
Now, do you have any explanation as to why you would predominantly see this only on the Eastern Front?
Well, that you would see it only on the Eastern Front is it was written about more on the Eastern Front. How many were issued there as opposed to how many were issued on the Western Front?
Because like we were looking for pictures on the Western Front, and we can't find a photo of anything before the battle, or like October or November.
There's a reason for that. Have you ever heard the story of the two fish trucks?
No.
The Ministry for Propaganda was where all the war correspondents, Kriegsberichters, brought all their photographs and everything. And towards the end of the war, as Berlin was being closed in on, they said, we have to destroy all these photographs. And they gave Colonel, I forget the guy's name, they said, you got to destroy all these photographs. And he said, jawohl. And he went and got 2 trucks. The only 2 trucks he could get were 2 fish delivery trucks. And he loaded all of the negatives and all of the existing photographs into these 2 trucks and tried to get the hell out of Berlin. Only 1 truck survived. You ever notice there's very few late war pictures at all?
There are, yeah, there's very few.
That's because all of the late war pictures were in the other fish truck.
Oh.
So this big block of, 43, 44, 45 photographs just sort of went poof. What happened to the other fish truck? I would really like to know.
Wow.
So yeah, that would be fun to find.
But isn't that interesting? I mean, because they weren't, I don't see any record of it like Italy or...
Well, if you look at U.S. Army Signal Corps photographs, which all still exist pretty much, you'll see where Germans surrendered. And you'll see the big piles of helmets and field gear. Look at the piles of weapons.
Sometimes you will see them?
Oh, you'll see these all the time.
Oh, that's good to know.
The famous propaganda film that was shot around the burning column during the Battle of the Bulge, you see at least 2 SS soldiers.
Well, that's